I want to talk about that scenario, that if what Gary Bauer is talking about actually happens, what the implications are for the Democratic Party. But before we get there, let's talk about that conservative consensus, because when we're talking about that conservative consensus, we're talking about it in terms of economics.
Yes.
And one of the things that happened over the past week or so, I mean, everything is sort of blended in together to me because night is day and day is night for me at this point. In terms of the amount of sleep I'm getting. But there was a resolution that was passed as part of the budget bill in the Senate that changed the way or called for the CBO to change to accept dynamic scoring. And this is really important because when we hear about all of the talk, the president and the administration still sort of pathologically keeping entitlement reform on the table. And by entitlement reform, we all know that we're talking about is cuts to benefits for Social Security recipients and probably Medicare recipients in some fashion or another. That this dynamic scoring is very important. Just talk about that for a brief moment, because one of the things I did see also when before I left was, and we got to take this with a grain of salt, is this polling that Republicans did in specific potential swing districts where they see potential pickups of Democratic seats, and showing that people that voters in those districts were very keyed into the deficit and the debt as a big problem.
Mm-hmm.
And this dynamic scoring plays into this because it basically, talk about this, but it plays into the notion that of Reaganomics in some respect, that cutting taxes actually raises revenue.
Right. Well, dynamic scoring has been, one of the holy grails for the Republicans and the right. Well, I shouldn't just say them. There are certain centrists that have been in favor of this for a long time as well. And what it basically is, it's a little bit of mumbo jumbo, at least in my opinion, in which it's asking the CBO, which right now is just very, simply focused on predicting how the budget will look in the future, projecting it based upon certain assumptions about money spent and money coming in. What they're asking them to do is to make a bunch of assumptions about how people are going to behave as a result of these changes, the money coming in and going out. This is a field in economics that is very interesting. So you remember Freakonomics, and there were a lot of there's a lot of study going on in this way. It's very, very fascinating and extremely dangerous to start having the government play this game. It is not a field which is, well established enough, or that they even know how to make the models to make this work. And what it's designed to do basically is have the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, and various other government budget prognosticators make the case for cutting taxes, because, again, we're back to that old supply side, stale supply side idea that the more you cut taxes, the more money you will bring in. And, I think that's been proven to be nonsense, but they're not going to give up. Now, what they did was they passed this. It came out of the committee on a party line vote in the House, and then they ended up passing it. The idea that, and it was like a state of the Congress or something, statement of the Congress. It wasn't something, it wasn't a specific law, but it was just to say, yes, we agree with this. We think we should be doing it. And this is one of those things that the right does. They're very good at it. They get this stuff. They just slowly but surely, whittle away at this. And over time, what that does is that ends up changing the assumption of what is normal. I mean, and we all see this when we watch the media. You see, for instance, right now, the consensus among the political establishment is that entitlements are going broke. We've got to, in order to save them, essentially we have to destroy them. The only thing we can do is cut them. And that is the result of many, many years of propaganda by people like Pete Peterson and various other fiscal conservatives, deficit hawks, saying this stuff over and over again. So this is how they do it. And then, it's an important aspect of politics that I don't think the Democrats do much at all, which is sort of play this long-term game of changing assumptions. Essentially they're very, very reactive and have been for a long, long time, and they don't. We can barely count on them to even protect their own signature achievements at this point. So I guess looking forward is too much to ask. But that is, that's one of the functions of a political party, is to set up the assumptions, to set up the cultural framework under which we all operate. And, the conservatives have been very, very good at doing that, and they're continuing to, even from their alleged position of weakness. And, as you can see the results of this. I mean, now we have a Democratic president chasing what I think of as his white whale of a grand bargain, relentlessly pursuing the idea that it is a good thing for a Democrat to cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, that this will be a legacy achievement of his, that people will remember him fondly, in the same way they remember Ronald Reagan, if he manages to get this thing done. Now, I mean, think about that. I mean, this is the Democrat doing that, and
I think the analogy is really more, in my mind, it is Bill Clinton cutting welfare.
Well,
because
too.
that has been a disaster that we have sort of like a slow, revealing disaster when particularly when you hit a period of joblessness that we've been in. Yet, I've said this ad nauseum on this program. Every time it's mentioned in any type of national forum, television essentially, people just say, Clinton did welfare reform in a positive, and that is part of the bucket list, I think, in the White House. Now I want to just make I don't want to belabor this CBO thing, but people should understand essentially what this dynamic scoring does is, and they haven't adopted it, but by getting a majority of senators, including 7 Democrats, to sign off on this, it is basically saying that when we present a budget that says we're going to cut taxes, and with the on one part of the ledger, and show that revenues increase because of it on the other side of the ledger, you got to sign off on it and say that makes sense. Again, like you say, it's not binding. But as it gains traction as an idea, it becomes problematic in the same way that the phrase, when a family has to tighten its belt, the government should too. I mean, that's not real. Economists disagree with that notion. Even Joe Scarborough says that we should be adding more stimulus, but it becomes adopted, and then it impacts our politics because the president, by all accounts, said, well, I'm not going to fight that fight, essentially. I'm not going to disabuse the American public of that notion. I will come out for it to get, as they say, within the circle of their belief system to attempt to sell them something else. But, of course, you can't sell them the opposite, which is really what we needed to be sold at that point.
Well, it's not even on the table. The opposite is just completely ignored, as we're seeing even now without dynamic scoring. The pursuit of austerity at a time of economic malaise at best, is totally wrong, but we're doing it anyway because the idea of, the government has to cut back has become that there's a certain kind of instinctive logic to that no one has actually challenged. Certainly the president hasn't. He's been going along saying, well, we need to do deficit reduction too. The difference is we want to do it in a more balanced way, whereas they just want to do it by cutting spending. Nobody's challenged the idea at all that we've done enough deficit reduction and that the deficit projections, even as they are currently scored, will shrink if the economy comes back, and in fact we should do the opposite. I mean, I think that argument just isn't out there, and I think it's a difficult one to make. I agree that it's not easy to explain to people that that the government the whole the Keynesian framework for dealing with this kind of lack of demand that's in the economy. But nonetheless, I mean, somebody ought to do it because what's happening is the opposite, and we're ending up choking off the economy. In fact, they're walking in to these political, ridiculous political traps they set for themselves, whether on purpose or by accident, like the sequester, which means we're cutting the heck out of everything at exactly the wrong moment. And the deal that's being put on the table is, well, the only thing we can do to stop that is to cut things in the future, like Medicare and Social Security. So we can only, now we're at a moment where the argument centers around the idea of you can either cut now or you can cut later, but you have to cut. And we're putting forward the idea that we're going to cut later, so that's really the better of the two options. That's the Democratic position, when in fact there should be no cutting. I mean, cutting should be out of there, especially since they've done a tremendous amount of cutting already.
Right.
I mean, they have $3 trillion in deficit reduction, mostly through spending cuts, but through some revenue that they got in the fiscal cliff deal. Let's declare victory on deficit and move along, because this is really very detrimental. But nonetheless, we got ourselves into this position, and it's kind of hard at this point to sort of excuse any of it as saying that it was accidental, since on both sides of the aisle, the mantra from the beginning, once the stimulus was done, which was at the very first month of the Obama administration's first term, we've been talking about deficit.